Well, hey, look to everybody who's kind of tuned in on this. Thank you very much. This is our inaugural interview conversation where what we're trying to do is talk about scaled security testing programs. James, do you want to kick it off with a short introduction about yourself, your background, where you're at now, and also sort of what your role was at Salesforce? And then maybe Brendan, you can follow.
Yeah, so I guess I got started with the AppExchange even before I was working at Salesforce. I was a consultant at Big Four, and I came over and I was at Salesforce for 11 years,
Wow.
working on product security and app marketplace quite a lot of the stuff in the early days of app marketplace, AppExchange, and now I'm a CISO over at Guidewire doing some of this in a very small way, but like everything else, soup to nuts over at Guidewire.
I'm Brendan O'Connor. I'm the CEO and co-founder at AppOmni. Big surprise that we are the leader in SaaS security. We do security for business applications. Before founding AppOmni, I was the CTO for security at ServiceNow. And then before that, I was at Salesforce for a total of 10 years. Worked with James when we were at Salesforce. We started back in 2007 when it was a very small company.
Yeah.
I think it grew from about 1,000 employees to 35,000 by the time I left.
I remember that, right? Like 2006, 2007 timeframe. That was kind of like when Salesforce really got the religion around security after there was an incident. Like that's usually how it starts.
I used to tell people that we come with the number one security problem solved. I would recruit on that and say, we have the number one security problem solved. And people would say, well, what is that? And I'd say, executive alignment.
Yeah.
It started with Mark Benioff, the CEO
Yeah.
and founder of Salesforce. It's not just lip service. He actually means it. He says, nothing's more important than trust. Customers don't trust us with their data. We don't have a business. That was part of the security investment from the very beginning. And that was a cool thing to be a part of. Really having the CEO believe that what we were doing was important to the future of the company.
Can you kind of describe the app marketplace, AppExchange, and the concept behind it to give listeners like a little bit of context?
Yeah, I can tell you kind of the early days. And then once we got it out of the cradle, as it were, James took it over and really raised that program from child to adult. But early days, Salesforce built a platform. And I remember one of the architects in the early days said, you have a platform when your customer builds something that you didn't know was possible. So like when your own customer is surprising you with your own darn software, you definitely have a platform there. So what they found was there was this company called Viva, which is now a very large independent company. They went public, but they started as a customization of Salesforce for life sciences and pharmaceutical sales. And so they just hyper customized the base platform for a very specific vertical and a very specific use case, field reps, and being able to access it from their phone, which at the time, when you still had on-premise software, your reps in the field couldn't get any of this stuff. So it was a great product, a great time in the market. And it started to take off and make real money. And so the business decided, like, we need to open this ecosystem and allow lots of people to develop, but we can't break that trust barrier. So a couple of things happened. We built an AppExchange security review and approval program where we wanted to have a minimum bar of trust in our ecosystem and just know that, not just anyone can apply and get access to our customers. There was a vetting process that included, like, are you a real company, and getting to know the founders as well as just the code they were shipping. And then in addition to that, really looking at how do we get another Viva? How do we get another company to start building a whole business connected into Salesforce? And so to do that, they came up with a language called Apex, which was a strongly typed server-side scripting language.
Brendan mentioned that we wanted to create another Viva. I think we wanted to create an ecosystem and teach all these other kind of smaller companies how to sell into the enterprise software market through SaaS too. So sort of
Like
how do
how to
we
sell up market.
like, you're a small company, you're a startup, and you want to sell to like the big companies, and you want to sell at the bar, the security bar and the performance bar and all these different bars that they have for enterprise software. And I
Interesting.
think there was an aspiration to sort of build out this ecosystem of companies that understood how the enterprise software market worked, and that required us to help them in a bunch of different ways. So there was a lot of like hand holding and guidance and coaching, and very smart people like the CEO that I work for at my current company was one of them. And I like to think that we really kind of helped a whole set of these smaller companies to learn what the bar was for security for enterprise software. And you can see
That's
now a ton of them are big companies now. They're
that's
very, very
fascinating.
successful. So
Yeah,
that was a
James,
pretty
you're so
exciting
right.
thing.
How does a small developer even have a shot at selling to an enterprise? You made it easy by establishing a platform where they could actually meet those requirements right off the bat.
Yeah, the business side could get them introduced to the customers if the platform integrated. And so there was a whole technology team that was, we need to integrate exactly like you said. We need to have this path for small developers with good ideas to be able to quickly prototype an application that meets enterprise business use cases. In a lot of cases, it may not be an independent company. It may just be a super valuable feature that everybody needs. And there's people that have made millions and tens of millions of dollars building really cool companies that solve one problem really well and getting access to that enterprise marketplace. So it was great for Salesforce, but I think it was also great for software as a service and a whole lot of, a new breed of independent software vendors.
Legitimized a lot of this stuff, right? And trust was so important at Salesforce. And so like our customers trusted us. And anything that we wanted to sort of bring into this circle of trust, we had to, put a focus on security. But it was a really interesting process of sort of building out, this ecosystem. It was
Yeah.
great.
I remember Salesforce was one of the first companies, if not the first company that I ever heard have a role titled Chief Trust Officer instead of Chief Security Officer.
Yeah, that was the title. So that was my title, Chief Trust Officer, and it was the CSO. There was no other security position because Mark Benioff, the founder, said trust is our number one value as a company. The whole rest of the business is dependent upon that trust. And he wanted it to be someone's job. And to him, one of the worst things that could happen is brand reputation, the service gets destroyed, hacked, data stolen, data held for ransom, all the things that could happen when you think about it. Salesforce is a bank of customer data. And this was the early days of cloud computing. And a lot of people were very paranoid about trusting someone else with their data. And so Mark said, we're going to make big promises that we do a better job securing their data than they do on premise, but we need to make sure that we live up to those promises. And that was the job of the Chief Trust Officer. It was a very amazing and interesting place to work, very hard place to work too. It's a hard job.
So we had to think about scale in a different way than I think a lot of companies have to think about it. We had to think like in 6 months, is this thing that we're doing going to still work? We had to anticipate like 6 months was like the horizon. It's like, is it still going to work in 6 months? It was really like this roller coaster straight up,
Yeah, we used to be able to onboard applications and get through 20 or 30 in a week because that was the total volume of the AppExchange. That was like people like James working really hard, but doing, semi-automated pen tests and knowing what to look for and having a checklist too. We got to the point where the weeks leading up to Dreamforce and everyone wants their new app submitted.
Yeah.
We get thousands of applications and you can't hire enough bodies. You can't hire enough pen testers to deal with that level of burst capacity and the scale that app store got to. But we did start with we'll just subsidize the cost by paying people to look for things and make sure it's secure. And that grew to semi-automated, to fully automated, to self-service, to now continuous monitoring. It's really an amazing behind the scenes program that makes that AppExchange work. But it started with literal manual process in the early days.
What was the number of apps when you guys were first getting started? With 20 to 30 per week that were coming through. I'm sure
it would be a high week when you started, James. What do you think?
I personally tested 180 applications in 1 year. I think my first year that I was there. So I remember when it crossed 1,000 apps and we were like, woohoo, I still have the jacket for it somewhere, like the 1,000 apps thing. And that was pretty early on. But yeah, we were probably doing 20, 30 tests a week. And eventually that helped us to scale out with some of our trusted partners, Bishop Fox being one of those when we were in the early days to sort of keep up with some of this volume.
Yeah. The philosophical approach that you took to what will it take for an app to get permission to be on the AppExchange? And then what were the actual requirements for the testing early days? And I would love to kind of explore that as it matured.
Yeah, the very, very first review, I think you would look at it as like a third-party vendor review, sort of. Like when I came in, the initial reviews that I was doing with KPMG and some of the others were like, they were a little less in depth than what they eventually became, but they
Less
eventually
technical at
became
first. They became more
less
technical.
technical.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What was it? So it was like
So
a
we were
policy procedure questionnaire type thing,
policy
or
procedure. We asked a bunch of questions about software development. What do you do? Not like do you do this thing? Thumbs up. Yeah. Like we asked them like what do you do to prevent XYZ vulnerability? Tell us about your software development life cycle and give us docs. And so it was a
got
lot
it.
like a vendor review, like you might do for like a
Third party,
supplier that you have. Yeah.
open ended
Like
though,
a
not
TPRM
no
thing, right?
checkbox style. Okay.
Yeah, but it was more like
Yeah.
make sure that this isn't money laundering, that you're a real company, that you're real people with a real product, that there's papers and a contractual
Yeah.
relationship. It was a diligence ops process, and we started to move security into it. But one of the things that James and his team built out over time was really taking it from a third party risk, are you a real company type of process, to what I think is still probably the best technical review requirement in the industry. Really, I mean that.
We started to recognize that there needed to be sort of resources and enablement that didn't exist for our platform and maybe didn't exist out in the world that could help these companies. Like we pointed to a lot of OWASP resources, et
Sure.
cetera, but we needed to sort of simplify some of that and come up with things that were specific to the Salesforce platform as well too. So we wrote a lot of documentation. We did some like coding challenges. I was doing a lot of webinars in the early days, just talking about basic web app security. And it was educational, on all these different sides. Like we got to watch and participate in this really, sort of awakening of a marketplace, which was pretty cool. But what that took was it took a lot of enablement in a lot of different ways, right?
Yeah.
So I know one of the questions that we talked about a little earlier or earlier on before we did this was, how do we sort of scale this? And one of the things that we did was we partnered with this, like at the time, tiny little Israeli startup called Checkmarks.
Yeah. I remember that.
And it was this teeny tiny company. And so we decided to make an investment in them and say, we're going to invest in you. And we have this proprietary language and we want you to help us to build out support for this language so that we can scale our processes, but also help our broader developer community because
Mhm.
customers were also developing on the platform. And so we built this partnership. They built out a tool. They got a lot of success selling into our customers, but we also had then another tool in our tool belt to enable our partners to do the first few steps of security work. Because the thing that we recognized sort of not super early on, but like maybe the step two was that we were doing a lot of retests. Like we were finding a lot of
Yeah.
problems because, as somebody who does offensive security or pen testing, it's easy to find stuff, right? But, you needed to put some tools and ability for these partners to be able to do the security work up front.
Salesforce did something really interesting, which was and this is my recollection, so correct me if I'm wrong here. You charged an application fee for anybody, and it was a nominal. It wasn't tens of thousands of dollars. It was a couple thousand.
Listing fee.
It was a listing
Yeah.
fee, right?
Grew from like 1,500 to I think a few thousand over time. It was
Yeah.
not a huge amount of money.
Like you could pull it off if you needed to, right?
If you were a software company that had any level of funding, you could pay for it. If you're paying for it out of pocket, it's a pretty hefty price tag.
Right.
And that listing fee, by the way, we didn't make any money off that. That strictly covered the testing fee. And I think we were actually revenue negative on that for most of the AppExchange. The security team and the security budget spent more on the program that we brought in. So we weren't charging exorbitant prices to customers. We're just trying to cover the ongoing support cost. But as we did that, just like we made an easy on-ramp for all these new folks to come in and sell into the enterprise, we gave them a platform that was trusted. But when they're plugging something into a Ruby server running somewhere else on the internet and it's passing our customer data and our credentials for our customers to that service and it's being distributed through our marketplace, we felt a certain amount of reputational risk. Like if their server gets popped and all my customers' data is stolen, I don't want to call them and say, oh, your data is gone. Let me tell you why it's not my fault. Like that's a terrible conversation to have with a customer. So we wanted it to be a safe place, but we also knew that we couldn't force everyone to be a security expert. So what we started to do was really scale up. This is how you do security. These are the types of things that you need to do and how you do them and why they're important. We would buy you Burp Suite Pro and give you a free license We even had a cloud version where we'd run it for you, just point at your web app. Let this off-the-shelf tool find the basic stuff and just read what it says and follow the instructions. So the AppExchange security ecosystem really became kind of training wheels for the ISV community.
If you were to do it again today, how would you do anything differently, or how would you do things a little bit differently based on what you've learned since then?
Sure. Two things that I would do differently. I would start publishing business metrics on day one, so the business sees what they're paying for. And then I would also have some sort of like way to talk about risk appetite, throughput, and like what the risks to the business are of not funding the program more. And, having a very kind of risk-based approach. The things that I would do the same are start manual. If you don't understand the problem, you can't automate the problem. And when you're solving a new problem, you don't fully understand it yet. So hire smart people to blaze a trail through the jungle and figure out what's the right way to go. Then bring in the automation.
Like you can figure out where the parts that can be automated and where the optimizations can be, but you can't. I like to say it as like you can't lead with a tool like that. Otherwise, your program and process will just be and have the limitation restrictions of the tool that you happen to select, right?
Well, truly and deeply understanding the problem you're solving and then automating and optimizing where you can.
Yeah, I think, from my perspective, Brendan, like nail on the head with business metrics. I think that was, really valuable when that started coming out. I think the next thing I would add to this is maybe a quicker feedback from the platform teams at the time. Having focused on it for a long time, was really focused on trying to make it easier to get people to pass. But we had not yet built this like feedback loop of, hey, could we get a backlog of features to make this easier for partners, like partner specific features to make security easier? And we did eventually get that. We had a team called Product Defense, which is, I've replicated that in my current job too. We have a security backlog of like non-money making features that make security better and easier for customers. But I would have built Product Defense sooner and sort of like got that feedback loop from, here's the things that we're seeing people fail for, to how do we solve that in a more programmatic way a lot quicker.
How is like your experience, what James has said about secure by default, like what are you seeing from an App Omni perspective that you think organizations could be doing from a SaaS security standpoint?
I think SaaS is the new OS of business. It's like we moved the endpoint into the cloud and we've abstracted it. It's the next iteration of the VM. We abstract the hardware component with infrastructure as a service. SaaS is just an abstraction of like the entire business stack. And so I think if you think of SaaS sort of like an endpoint, you understand what you need to do to secure it. So just like you need to update and patch a fleet of endpoints and you need to make sure that they have all the right software and all the right hardening, you need to do the same thing for your SaaS applications.
This has been fantastic. Thank you guys both so much. I might have some random questions that pop up later that maybe I could send to you guys and you guys could do a quick follow-up, or if we have any audience members that have follow-up questions, hopefully, we can get a little Q&A thing going. But I appreciate it so much. Yeah. Thank you guys.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Vinny.